Bank of Mom and Dad, as some people might have heard, is one of these rarely used banks, and when it's used, it always brings up a few questions for me, and it always brings up a few concerns. So we're going to break down this article. Let me know what you're guessing in the comment section down below. Should the Bank of Mom and Dad get involved? I'll give you my full, uncensored opinion at the end of this video when we finish reading the article. And if you're looking to buy your first home without the help of mom and dad or with the help of mom and dad, I'm going to have my free buyer's guide in the comment section down below. Feel free to download that buyer's guide, use it to your advantage, and ask me if you have any questions about the buying process.
All right, so here is the article here. Let me just shrink myself down to size a little bit. So titled, How to Save for a House Without the Bank of Mom and Dad, and we're going to get to it here. So the article is part of a Global News homeschool series, which provides Canadians the basics they need to know about the housing market that was not taught in school. So this is a great initiative. I think there's a lot of miseducation or lack of education for people when they're trying to buy their first house, which is why we do what we do when it comes to YouTube. So the Bank of Mom and Dad, an informal financial institution that's open to some, but not all prospective home buyers, of course, has become a major factor, whether or not some Canadians can break out and actually purchase something in the housing market. Now, having a parent or grandparent with enough spare cash to lend towards a down payment or to help with a mortgage is a privilege, of course, and it's only a lucky few that are actually able to have this assistance. And often these lines that young Canadians are divided between homeowners and the renters. So a lot of people who are stuck renting are not being given this opportunity from the Bank of Mom and Dad, so to speak. Statistics Canada reported recently in November that young adults whose parents own their home were more than twice as likely to be homeowners themselves compared to children of renters. They did that report directly consider whether financial gifts were a part of the trend, but it did cite separate studies about the growing prominence of integral wealth transfer helping to fund home purchases. So if the parents potentially owned a property, they were using some of their equity or some of what they've gained from that property to help their children purchase one. 2021 CIBC report, for instance, notes that the size of the average financial gift given to a family member for the home purchase was $82,000, which is $30,000 more than it was 6 years prior, which was $52,000 at that point in time. So $82,000 is a huge chunk of money. In some cases, that is the complete down payment that's required, depending on the house. And in other cases, that might just be the deposit that's required on your 24-hour window when you actually do lock in a contract on a property. Having access to the Bank of Mom and Dad has become very important for would-be buyers, particularly Canadians in most expensive housing markets, and that would be your Toronto, your Vancouver market. These are two of the most expensive across Canada, so that's where we're going to see the Bank of Mom and Dad really stepping in if they haven't already. And part of that is due to the bleak state of housing affordability in major Canadian markets, which is the 41-year high. So we are seeing some really high numbers across the board real estate-wise. We all know this comes from the Bank of Canada and what they've kind of done over the last couple of years with the rates increasing, and that's really not something that we have the ability to control all that much. The Bank of Canada is trying to get inflation under control, and are they going a little bit too far, or have they gone a little bit too far? Some may say yes, some may say no, but it has got the Bank of Mom and Dad involved. In Toronto, household income needed to buy a home is $246,676, according to the recent National Bank of Canada report, which notes that the bar is even higher in Vancouver, if you can believe that. That's a massive number and crazy to think that it has to be higher in Vancouver. It would take nearly 5 years for a Toronto resident earning a median salary to save just a minimum down payment on a typical condo, just a condo, in the city, said National Bank. The report does not take into account the increase in rent over that period of time, but it assumes the individual can save 10% of their monthly income towards the eventual down payment. Now, faced with levels of financial burden, he says that parents he works with are increasingly prioritizing down payment savings for their kids alongside with education and wedding gifts in their financial planning. So because of the way the housing market's gone, we're seeing parents budgeting for their future children's down payment. I'm a parent myself and my kids are young, but it's something definitely that needs to be considered even at a much younger age than our parents would have had to in previous generations. So it's not uncommon to see parents who are saving and planning to provide home down payment assistance and gifts to their child. And we're talking adult child, of course, even while they're still young or teenagers and they're thinking 10 years down the road. This is a whole new phenomenon. So like I said, this is not something that we're talking about 5 years in advance. This is a larger scheme that people are thinking. And I guess maybe I'm not thinking far enough out myself here. So we're seeing, before ruling themselves out of the ownership dream, prospective buyers can now know how close they are to affording a home by taking a stock of their finances. And the way they're doing this is by checking out your metrics, like the average income needed to buy a home, how many months it'll take to save a down payment. These can be useful and kind of give the potential home buyers a sense of, okay, where am I on this track? Does it make sense? Will I ever be able to own a home? And working with a professional can also give you a sense of whether you can realistically afford what you're being offered, including the costs on top of the mortgage, like your closing fees, property tax, regular maintenance. And that's something that you get when you work with an agent like myself. I'm not worried about just your monthly mortgage payment. That's just one facet of what you're going to pay monthly. So even if the mortgage, whoever's going to provide it, whether it's a bank or a broker, even if they say, yeah, you're approved for mortgage, you definitely need to consider all of the other facets and all of the additional money that's going to need to come into that one monthly payment before you go ahead and you pull that trigger. So there's a warning as well for those who are leaning on the bank of mom and dad for the down payment. If they can afford the home only because of mom and dad's money and not their own saving habits, they might quickly find themselves overwhelmed with the actual carrying costs of a home. Makes complete sense to me, which tends to be more expensive than renting. We all say rent is throwing your money away, and in some cases, it very well could be. But we have to understand it's not the same when it comes to your payments. So your payments can be significantly less if you're renting, and we're talking in the thousands of dollars than it would be if you're buying. So in order to purchase a home, you need to be aware of what comes beyond just that initial help from mom and dad. We need to know, is it going to be something that's long-term and feasible for us to actually pay this mortgage monthly? Because you can't just trade your house back in that easily. It's going to cost you even more money if you're going to do something like that. So regardless of where the down payment comes from, whether it's from your savings account, the bank of mom and dad, or anywhere else, it's important to understand what those ongoing expenses are so that when it's time to actually pay the expenses, you're prepared for it. If someone finds themselves close to breaking into the housing market, but their spending habits aren't in line with home ownership, they might want to consider some lifestyle changes to build that savings muscle. So if you're somebody who needs that Starbucks coffee every morning, just look at how much that actually affects your bank account versus how much making a cup of coffee at home will. That's one of the simplest changes that I think people can make. And if you can't make that change and you don't have that extra disposable income to buy a home, you're going to have something that you cut off your list here. The low-hanging fruit here is in canceling reoccurring expenses. Now, the easy things, obviously, are things like your coffee or reoccurring expenses from subscription services that can accumulate over time, and diligently reducing the amount of food waste throughout the year. So if you're like me, you've got young kids, there's a lot of food waste, unfortunately. So if we can limit a lot of that stuff, if you're a single person, it's much easier to do. Obviously, if you're buying your first home, you potentially don't have younger kids and don't have this additional food waste, but make sure you are not wasting the money when it comes to the food either. Well, these kinds of actions, they're going to make an impact, but they're not going to make a huge impact. Those of you who are dead set on home ownership might have to think more realistic and more dramatic about what you need to change in order to own a home. You may not be able to own a home in Ontario, you're saying here, right? So you have to think about what the options are when it comes to other provinces like Quebec or Winnipeg, and the average home there is going to be significantly less, and you're only going to need to make roughly $100,000 to own a property. So in Calgary, the typical salary needed to buy a condo is below the median income for the city. With estimates, it'll take less than 2 years to save time for a down payment. So 2 years to 5 years in the GTA. So big difference here. And maximizing your first home savings account. It may not be enough just to put aside 10% of your pay each month. it may take you too many years to actually purchase a property. Now, they're saying if you open up your first-time savings account, you actually have the ability to contribute up to $8,000 annually, which is great, and up to $40,000 with a tax-free contribution withdrawal. Now, if you're watching this video before December 31st, you can actually open one of these accounts up prior to that, and then it'll carry over into the following 2024 year. So you have 16 grand that you can put in there if you open an account before the 31st of December. Now, tax-free investing can be an attractive proposition for Canadians, but it warns that customers ought to be mindful of the risk tolerance, particularly when it comes to an FSHA. So the individual is looking to use your FSHA contributions within the next 3 years. It might be smart for you to stay at a low risk instead of high risk so you don't lose your potential investment, he says. Now, while there are often high returns to be found on equity markets over the year horizon, Heath notes that the periods of volatility like the past couple of years could result in a downsized down payment by the time that it's needed. So you need to understand, if you're investing in anything, there's always that high risk and then there's that low risk. So if you are investing, call it $20,000 into an FSHA, there's potential that it's worth less when you need it. There's also potential that it's worth significantly more when you need it. So you need to really just weigh the factors of what makes the most sense for you. How quick is your time horizon looking like? If you're 20 years old and you opened up this account, you may not need that money for a longer period of time. If you're 30, then you might want to be a little bit more conservative because you want that money and you want to use it sooner rather than later. And just because the FSHA is the top dog for home buyers doesn't mean that customers should forget about the RRSP and TFSA accounts. These also play a huge role. RRSP, for example, is a home buyer option where you can draw up to $35,000. It's tax-free on the purchase of your first home, and you have to repay that $35,000 over the course of 15 years. The tax-free savings account, my favorite account, to be honest, is the most flexible of the three options, since you can use this for whatever you like, whether it's your first home, second home, third home, a new couch. The TFSA, is very flexible in that nature. Now, can you make it as a wealthy renter? Very good question. I think that the article is brought up here. So the stark reality of Canada's modern housing is that not everyone who wants to buy a home can necessarily afford one. Okay, fair enough. He says that it's important to be really realistic when it comes to high costs of home ownership, particularly Canadians living in large cities have seen prices skyrocket over the past few years. And we might be feeling the fear of missing out, or that FOMO as they call it. For those who are eyeing homeownership as a retirement or wealth building strategy, he notes that there's no guarantee that the kind of robust appreciation seen in home prices over the past 2 decades will follow in the next 20 years. So if you were to look back at a chart over the last 30 years of real estate, it's always been a good investment. It's always seemed to have gone up and climbed up that ladder. Unfortunately, right now we are at that top of the ladder, or maybe a rung or two down. So the growth aspect is hard to really see it going too crazy from where we are today. Instead, he says that Canadians who are boxed out of ownership should take advantage of what tends to be a lowering housing cost as a renter. All right, let's get into what that means here for him. He says that if a renter can invest aggressively with low fees over a longer horizon, then they can be financially successful without needing to enter the ownership market or make withdrawal from the bank of mom and dad. I think that if the renter does the right things, they can be a wealthy renter. Now, personally, if you haven't read the book, The Wealthy Renter, it's on my shelf behind me here, it's a great book. And that concept is that if you cannot purchase a house, or maybe if you're not there yet, you continue to utilize the difference between what it would cost you to buy a home and what it costs you to rent a home. So if it costs you $5,000 to own a home a month, $3,000 to rent, you take that $2,000 a month and you invest it in something. You invest it in stocks, in something that's going to continue to grow your potential money, hopefully. So that way you're still making that equity that you would if you owned a property. And instead, you're just making that in stocks or bonds, or you can put it in your TFSA, RRSP, FSHA account and have some growth on that. Even if it's low growth, it's better than nothing at all. So being smart with your money is extremely important. Even if you're a renter, you can still end up on a great financial path. It doesn't have to be only homeowners who are in that position, but it does make a difference of what you do with that remaining amount between the rent and the buy monthly.
So my opinion on the Bank of Mom and Dad, it's twofold. It's nice. I'm a parent. I would love to help pay for my kid's house if I had the means to do so. However, we are seeing some really big issues. And when it comes to the bank of mom and dad, we're seeing some parents taking out loans and mortgages on their homes when they have no mortgage in order to help get their kids a property. And although this sounds like it's a great idea, it sounds very noble and honest and amazing for these parents. And I know that they're probably very happy to do so. But I think the reason that they're doing it is to make their kids happy, of course, but they don't understand the consequences of it. The consequences could be serious. And what we're talking about is somebody who's potentially in their 60s, maybe later, close to retirement, thinking about retirement, and now all of a sudden they have this newfound debt that is in the house. And it's possible right now, or in the last few years, that the Bank of Mom and Dad has assisted the child or their children to buy properties. And unfortunately, the property is worth significantly less now than it was worth when the Bank of Mom and Dad originally forked down that large down payment or deposit, whatever it was that they were helping with. So there's some risks involved, and I think it just needs to be more common knowledge for what those risks actually are, because understanding that the Bank of Mom and Dad potentially could have some issues further down the line, they may not actually go ahead and help their kids, or maybe those kids don't need a detached house for their first property if that's the case. Maybe they can start with a condo, work their way up that real estate ladder. That's just my opinion. I think putting yourself at risk in your 60s when you potentially don't have a job or won't have a job in a few years, and adding a mortgage to your lifestyle is going to set yourself up for a difficult future. Now, if you have the means and it's not going to be an issue and you don't even need to pull out a mortgage at all, then it's a different story completely. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Am I right? Am I wrong for thinking this way? I'd love to know your opinion. If you've had the Bank of Mom and Dad help you out with your purchase of a property, let me know what that was like. Was it something that you asked them, they offered to you? Love to know your thoughts. See you guys in the next video. Bye for now.